licorice was sort of a basic food group around our house.
I think it should remain that for most people. I think.
And as a kid, Switzer, by the way, although it sounds like a German name, the family originally came from Germany. They are Irish. So,
Okay.
I mean, I'm old enough to actually remember eating licorice on the roof of the factory and watching them build the arch. That would have been in the
Really?
mid 60s, 63, 64, I guess. Yeah, and it was kind of fun.
Hi, this is Mish Hancock, and you are listening to MichMash, a place where I get to talk to the weird, wacky, wonderful people of this world, people I adore and want to know more about. My guest today was actually a guest before and has come back to talk to me, Patrick Murphy. He has spent 30 years producing television programs for PBS, is a 5-time Emmy Award winner, but most importantly right now, we are going to talk about licorice. Hi, Patrick.
Hello, Mitch. How are you?
I am good, and I'm very excited about this book that you have come out with because I am a huge fan of licorice, like by far my most favorite candy on earth.
Well, that's
And I
wonderful.
have memories of the whole Switzer's thing. So I was like, I have to talk to him. I have to know more. So tell me how this all came about.
Well, Switzer's Licorice was just a big part of my life growing up. My my father worked at the company, and his father and brothers, and my great grandfather worked at the company. He
Oh
actually
my gosh.
he actually started it with Fred Switzer back in the 1880s. So licorice and the factory and all of that was just huge in our family. Licorice was sort of a basic food group around our house.
I think it should remain that for most people. I think.
And as a kid, I spent a lot of time in the factory down by the Eads Bridge. That the famous factory with the and then it seemed that as I told the story of Switzer's Licorice to people, I was surprised by how many people knew the factory because of the big sign down there by the Eads Bridge,
Right.
the big candy sign, and then the smell along the riverfront for
Yes, no, that
decades. I mean,
exactly.
that was one of the sort of hallmarks of St. Louis was the licorice smell down by the river, and it's just sort of having the inside stories of how these two families, the Switzers and the Murphys, started this company. Switzer, by the way, although it sounds like a German name, the family originally came from Germany. They are Irish. So
Okay.
so it's two Irish American families back in the 1880s starting this candy company and living in Kerry Patch, which is this horrible slum just north of downtown, a little northwest of downtown, about where the car projects are now. And
It sounds so nice though. Carrie
yeah,
Patch sounds
no,
so
Kerry Patch was horrible.
whimsical.
Yeah, Kerry Patch was run by gangs. It was an all
Oh
Irish
my
neighborhood.
gosh.
The Irish
Okay.
were sort of redlined back then, and very, very unpopular to be Irish Catholic back then.
Gotcha.
There were signs up in the store and factory gates saying no Irish need apply. And if you look at the
Wow.
newspapers back then, the Irish are always depicted as monkeys. So I mean, they were up against a lot living in Kerry Patch and trying to do something to get a little piece of the American dream. And for them,
Exactly.
candy was the way.
And
Yeah.
licorice in particular.
Yeah, licorice after 1940. They made
Okay.
all kinds of different candy, all the way from when the company started in the 1880s. They started making some licorice before the First World War, but it was just a division of the plant. They didn't really get serious about licorice until 1940 when it looked like sugar rationing was going to make it impossible to keep on making caramels
Got
and
ya.
chocolates and things like that. So they had to figure something out. So they went to all licorice and then they never went back.
So am I making this up in my head? But when I was a kid, I remember there, I don't know if this was a separate store or if it was part of Switzer's, but that I would go to this store by the Eads Bridge
Hmm.
and that you could buy licorice there, the Switzer's licorice, and it would sometimes be warm, like it had just was hot off the press, if you will.
I don't know if it was actually a store, but people would come by the factory and buy licorice, pretty much right off the. In fact, when we were kids, we would go into the drying rooms where it was still drying before it was packaged, and we just grab off a chunk
Oh,
and
yum.
and eat it. It was really good. And back then, everything was black. They didn't start introducing.
They didn't have red.
They didn't. Yeah, that was in the late 50s where they started introducing red, and then they started doing whips and lariats and bites and all kinds of other candies. It's kind of interesting how it started. My great grandfather Joe Murphy was born in Dublin during the potato famine, and
Okay.
his family had a candy shop in Dublin. I've actually been to the address and seen where it was, and it was in downtown Dublin. So he grew up working in the candy store. And then in the 1860s, he got involved in the Irish freedom movement. At that time, Ireland had been occupied for like 700 years by the English. And there were these constant efforts, armed rebellion. So he was in an armed rebellion in 1867, right outside of Dublin. And it was suppressed. They always were suppressed, it seems. And then he got away, but they found his name on a list. And if they found him, they were going to hang him. So he was 20 years old and got on a boat in steerage and came to America, ended up in St. Louis with nothing. All he knew how to do was make candy. And he married a woman named Margaret Switzer, and she had a brother named Fred Switzer. So, Fred grew up on the streets of Cary Patch and was a pretty smart kid. And he was, selling various things on the street. Well, Margaret had the idea of combining her husband's ability to make candy with her brother's ability to sell stuff. And so they started cooking candy in their tenement kitchen. And Murphy made the stuff, and Fred sold it. And they around 1886, they moved into a factory on First Street, right about right between the legs of the Gateway Arch would be now.
Okay.
Before they tore all those buildings down in the 40s. And they made all different kinds of candy. And the reason it went from being Murphy Switzer Candy Company to Switzer Candy Company is in 1893, there was a big depression, sort of like the 1930s depression.
Okay.
It was called the Panic of 93. And the company went bankrupt. And Fred Switzer and his sister bought it out of bankruptcy. And ever after that, for 3 generations later, the Switzers owned it, and the Murphys worked as the production people. So I'm like I'm the first Murphy who hasn't worked at the factory.
I'm telling you.
Yeah.
So, and the factory's no longer there, but where is the factory now?
Well, the factory blew down in 2006.
Okay.
There was a big storm, and it's right there by the Eads Bridge, so it was a big deal. And it was just beyond saving. And it had been abandoned for like 20 years. In the 1970s, they moved the operation to a place on Broadway, just a few blocks away on Broadway.
Okay.
So it was deserted for years. And then in 2007, it was so messed up that they just tore it down. But it was totally out of business. The company in the 60s was sold to a corporation, which sold it to another corporation, and it ended up at Hershey's, owned by Hershey's. Hershey had another licorice product called the Twizzler. So so they just killed and stopped making Switzer licorice altogether. So the reason it's around today is that Mike Switzer and his partner Dan Warner, also a friend of mine, they bought the trademark from Hershey and started the company back up again. So they don't actually manufacture it in St. Louis, but it's headquartered in St. Louis.
Okay.
And they make all different kinds of Switzer's licorice now. They make the black, but they also make new exotic flavors that sort of pop and zing, like lemonade licorice and cherry cola licorice and things like that. So it's back. I mean, which is kind of an amazing story, because at one time there was no idea that it would ever be, back on the racks. And nowadays you can get it at Deerberg's and Straub's and Cracker Barrel, and it's distributed nationally. And Straub's and Cracker Barrel, Dollar Tree. They have like 9,000
Oh,
stores.
wow. Yeah.
And the only place that isn't selling it now is Schnucks. I don't know what that's all about. They should. They should distribute it.
Maybe I should tag Schnucks in this and be like, guys.
Yeah, maybe.
It's a St. Louis thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, yeah. I mean, every St. Louis store, I think, should be selling St. Louis licorice. Yeah.
Right.
So
Well,
Switzer's has got this great tradition,
cool.
and it's amazing now that the book is out. How many people have been in contact with me telling me all these personal stories about how they
Right.
love Switzer's licorice and how it was a part of their childhood and growing up. But actually,
I would love to know people's stories. I mean, I think that because if you were around at that, I mean, we all loved it. And
yeah,
I mean, I remember where going by the factory and
yeah,
buying licorice and whatever. But then there was also a gentleman in my neighborhood who worked there, and I do not remember this man's name, but what I do remember was
yeah,
every Halloween
yeah,
he gave you a full out package of
yeah,
black and red licorice. You stopped by that house
yeah,
on
definitely.
Halloween for sure.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and I hear a lot of stories like that, not just in St. Louis either, but all over the country because
Really?
it was distributed everywhere. Yeah.
Is there any story, excuse me, that comes up that you think that was a really cool story?
Yeah. Well, there's one story about after World War II, there was a woman named Alice Phelps, young woman about 18 years old, 19 years old, and she started working at the factory. Most of the people who worked at the factory always were women, and they're the ones that organized the unions and I mean, so it's called Candy Men because the men in my family always describe themselves as candy men.
Okay,
But
got ya.
women play a really important part of this story. There was a young woman named Alice Phelps who worked at the factory, and at the time, this surprised me. There was a no talking rule at the factory. You weren't supposed to talk unless it
Oh,
was
wow.
related somehow to your job. So Alice was kind of a talker, and she started a few weeks into the job talking to the women, whispering in their off shifts and on their way to the plant or on their way back home, that on a particular Monday they would just start talking in defiance of this rule. So the day came, people started talking, very scared at first. Then the men started talking, and the entire factory was just chatting away. So Switzer halted the entire production line, gave a speech about how that was totally unacceptable, but people didn't stop. It was like this little revolution. And
Ah,
it's really cool. Nobody turned her in. Nobody ratted on her. Nobody knew that it was her until years later. And I heard this story from someone who had worked at the factory. And in fact, she went on to become the main shop steward decades later. And they even named one of the big kettles in the basement where they cooked the licorice Big Alice.
oh, how
So
fun.
yeah, nice way to
Go
be honored.
Alice.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, it
yeah,
doesn't sound like it's very fun to work if you can't, or you'd have to talk in code. Like,
I guess.
oh, so did you have licorice for dinner last night?
We had a lot of licorice around the house, and any of the kids in the neighborhood who came by always got licorice. And
Oh,
yeah, yeah. And
popular house, right?
it was, yeah. And again, it was just so much fun to actually go down there and eat the licorice and hang out around the factory. I loved all the noise and the motion, and the movement and the boxes sailing out the doors into the trucks on First Street. And at the time when I was, I mean, I'm old enough to actually remember eating licorice on the roof of the factory and watching them build the arch. That would have been in the
Really?
mid 60s, 63, 64, I guess. Yeah, and it was kind of fun. I mean, that's a real
That's
that's
cool.
a St. Louis memory, eating Switch's licorice and watching them build the arch.
No kidding. So, did you get to see it being made too? Like, did you get to get into the watch it
Oh
on the
yeah.
factory floor or
Oh yeah,
anything?
we were everywhere. We had sort of full reign of the place since my dad worked there. But yeah, down in the basement, they put all this stuff, like licorice extract and molasses, and it was like this bubbling cauldron of liquids, these giant kettles, these vats. And then they take it out and they let it cool for like a couple of days. It took like 4 days to make a batch of licorice.
Okay.
And then they would it'd be like in 150-pound trays, like a little and it would gel. It would be hardened, and then they'd run it up to the top floors, and then gravity driven, get cut into pieces, and then dried, and then packaged. Yeah, we saw every aspect of it. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, how cool. So you just got the gumption one day. It was time to write a book about this. It's
Yeah,
a
we'd always
very
been.
St. Louis story, I'm sure, but I love that there's people around the world going, hey, I got a Switzer story.
Oh yeah, and I'm hearing now from Murphy cousins all around the country, and Switzer cousins from all over, because we're cousins because our great grandparents,
Right.
got married. So it's been a lot of fun connecting, with family and people from other cities. I knew it was one of the biggest licorice manufacturers in the country, but I didn't realize that it had permeated so many people's lives, in so many different parts of it. But it is definitely a St. Louis story. It's an immigrant story, the whole Carrie
Right.
Patch, Irish trying to break in, get a piece of the American dream, that kind of story. And it's a nice, historical tale because, it was very much affected by historical forces in St. Louis, like um, uh, the Great Depression. Candy did great during the Depression because it was inexpensive. People could afford it, penny candy.
Well, and it makes you happy.
It does. It does. And Mike Switzer, who now is, partner in the company, he describes it as one of the first consumer decisions that people ever make. When you're a kid, your parents give you a nickel or a dime. Nowadays, maybe it's a quarter or a dollar, I don't know, and send you down to the store, and it's your choice to buy the candy that you want.
Yeah.
And,
Bought
we all had
candy.
that experience as kids going down there with a quarter or whatever. And it's the first consumer decision that a lot of us ever make as kids.
That is so
Do
true.
I want this penny candy or that penny candy? Or do I want to get Lickamaids or, Mary Janes or Jujubes or, whatever it is. And the candy business was really competitive in St. Louis too. There were like 100 different candy companies
Were
at the
there
turn
really?
at the turn of the century. Yeah.
Are there any that still remain other than Switzer's that you know of?
Mavrakos is still around. That was founded by a Greek gentleman named Mavrakos. And
Okay. What
uh,
do they make? I don't know
uh,
that I know this one.
they make chocolate, Mavrakos. Yeah, they make chocolate and caramels and, like boxes
Okay.
of candy. Vincent Price, the
Yes.
horror actor, his father, also named Vincent Price Sr., had a big company called the National Candy Company. And there aren't as many as there were then. Of course, a lot of companies like, Hershey's and have bought up these companies, these little
Okay,
companies.
yeah.
But all the way up until 1966, it was just a family operation, Switzer's and the Murphys, generation after generation.
Well, and Bissinger's, that's St. Louis, right?
Yes,
Okay. Right.
but I'm not sure where Bissinger's was founded. I
Yeah,
don't
I don't know.
right
I
off the
don't
bat. I'm not
maybe we
sure.
should write a book about
Yeah, Bissinger's, write a book about
this.
that. Yeah,
You could just
yeah.
do a whole candy series.
Yeah,
I
it was
mean,
fun getting a lot of pictures. There are like over 100 almost 100 photos in the book.
are
A
there
lot of
really?
from the Switzer family, some from the Murphy family. Missouri Historical Society, and just I think it's fun to have a lot of photographs. I think people I do like looking at photographs.
Oh my gosh, yes. I gotta
Yeah.
see them. I have to get this book. I haven't gotten it yet, but I
Oh,
so
I'm
want
sorry.
to.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to because I think it
Okay.
just sounds amazing.
Well, it's in
So,
books. It's in bookstores, and you can get it at Amazon, the usual places, or you can go to the website candymendthebook.com and order it there.
there you
Candymendthebook.com.
go.
Yeah. So lots of ways to get it. It's kind of a nice cover.
Let's see it.
There's the cover,
Very cool.
and that's a picture from about 1884 of the people who worked at the candy
I'll be
company.
darn.
Yeah.
Did you get to did you interview different people for the book? Like, was there anyone that you talked to? I mean, other than Alice, that was really interesting.
Well, Alice, actually, I talked to somebody who knew Alice. Alice had passed
Okay.
away.
Gotcha.
And I interviewed a whole bunch of Switzers and Switzers who are older than I am, who remember a lot of the stories and could talk about their grandfather, the original Fred Switzer, who from Carrie Patch. And I interviewed a couple of people who worked at the factory, one of them who was responsible for how the factory was made. And I had a lot of family stories that I grew up listening to as a kid. And then I talked to the Switzers and I compared the Murphys version of the stories with the Switzer version of the stories, and they were very much the same.
Oh, cool.
And then I was really fortunate because back in 1967, my great uncle, Uncle Fred, he was born in 1887, grew up in Carrie Patch, worked at the factory before the First World War and afterwards. And he had all of these family stories. And in 1967, my dad and his brother recorded like 4 hours of him telling family stories and factory stories.
Oh,
So that was a great source. And it turned out that my great grandfather, who came over from Ireland, one of his hobbies in the 1890s was photography. So this guy from Ireland took pictures on glass plates, and some of those photographs are still around today.
Oh, how cool!
I know. And then one of the amazing things that happened was I found a canister of 8mm film, and just with my parents' things in a box with a bunch of other stuff. So I could hardly wait to get a projector and see what was on it.
No kidding.
Well, it turned all it said on the outside of the canister was Murphy's 1930. So I put it in and I saw that what it was 8 minutes of the entire family, including the old guy from Ireland, in the front yard of Webster Groves on Lockwood, all standing there mugging with getting their picture taken on movie film. So I'm turning this into an hour-long program for Channel 9 now.
Cool.
And to have that film is wonderful.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
So have you started on it?
Yeah. First I'm writing the script, and then I'm, the interviews that I did before, now I need them on, video. And then I'll lay in the pictures, but I should have it finished by June.
Very cool. Oh my gosh, I love it. I've got
it's fun.
questions. Can I ask you my kind of wacky questions?
Sure.
So other than licorice, do you have any other favorite candies?
Yeah, Good and Plenty's.
Oh, God.
Which is kind of licorice. Which is kind of licorice. So
but Good and Plenty's are awesome. They're like,
actually, Good and Plenty's was at one time made by Switzers.
Really?
After it was bought by a corporation, and they brought in other candies. The Good and Plenty's was really failing because somebody put like a jelly-like substance in the middle of it, and Switzer swapped it out and put hard licorice in it.
Right.
And sales, went through the roof. So they kind of saved Good and Plenty. But we also like for like birthdays and anniversaries and things like that. Yeah, we'll get a box of like, Bissingers and with the little caramels and the chocolate and stuff. But yeah, there's a lot of good candy out there. We ate some real junk as kids too. I think we'd go to the movie theater and we'd get, have you ever called this stuff like Licomades? They'd be little.
I love Licomades.
Oh my God.
Because the thing that you use to get the powder out that has a vanilla flavor. And oh my God,
but the stuff, we, when we were kids, we'd go to like, the movies at the neighborhood movie theater and get Licomades. I think they were a nickel back then. And we'd eat them. And they're like, they've got to be just the worst thing for your body in the world.
I don't
it's like pure sugar. It's
like sugar that you have a sugar stick and you deliver it into your system.
Yeah, it's like when I was a kid, we had like a deli in our neighborhood, and there would be, honest, it sounds like something from another century, but there would be this barrel and it would be long strips of paper with little candy dots dropped on it, and you'd pick the paper.
I remember those, and you'd end up eating some of the paper.
Oh, always, yeah.
Always.
But nowadays, can you imagine the health violations of going into a store, pulling out of a barrel a strip of paper and eating the candy?
Especially now, that'd be a big no-no.
We'd ride our bikes there without a helmet and eat poison candy out of the barrel, and yet we survived.
I
We
know.
survived.
I did the same thing as a kid. I mean, I would ride my bike over to the candy store. That's where I
Yeah,
spent my allowance.
yeah,
And yeah, no helmet and,
yeah.
riding in the back seat of cars without, we'd be
Hey,
sleeping.
the ultimate trick would be to eat Licomades while you're running behind the DDD truck, spraying for mosquitoes.
I say let's just do this.
The ultimate 1950s, 1960s childhood experience. Yeah, what the heck? I mean, like I've lived to be pretty old so far.
I know. Somehow we survived. I don't
Yes.
know. I mean, it's good that we have these safety
Maybe it
things
was all that
now,
Switzer's
but
licorice. Maybe it
it
was the
was that,
Switzer's
you know
licorice.
what? There's something to the licorice oils, I think, that protected us in many ways.
Well, at one time, I mean, like 2,000 years ago, licorice, it grows in like in Iran and Turkey and that part of the world. The
Okay.
licorice plant from which they get the licorice root and extract, the licorice juice. And it's 50 times sweeter than sugar. And that's why it was a good substitute for sugar during the war.
Yeah.
And it was used I think Julius Caesar drank it as a health drink.
Well, it's supposed to be healthy for you, licorice tea. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah,
Very
and I
cool.
mean, like you and I love it. Some people don't,
I
and
know. I mean, especially because people are like, ooh, black licorice is so gross. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's so good.
yeah. Well, can I have yours then? I mean,
Yeah,
it's
I'll
yeah,
take that.
yeah. Nothing gross. And they used to make licorice pipes and licorice cigarettes, so the kids could have. When you were a kid, did you ever have candy cigarettes?
Oh, yeah, I remember those. That was an awesome idea.
Very incorrect. It was just cool to hang around the corner and
Now they just call them candy sticks. Like I've seen them before.
no,
Like,
but they
still
looked like
have
little
'em.
cigarettes. They had little
Yes, they
red
had the little
sugar or
red
something,
tip
so it
on
looked
the
like they
end.
were. Yeah, that's what it all
Oh,
starts with. It starts
we
with
thought that was a good
candy
idea.
cigarettes, and before you know it, you're smoking the real stuff.
The things, I think they still kind of do that in some ways, like start kids out early with something like, that's a great idea.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
that's just terrible and hilarious at the same time. So you have many skills, sir.
Thank
Do
you.
you have a skill that is just untapped, like some wacky, crazy skill that we don't know about?
Well, last time I was on the show, we talked about wood prints and art, and
Yeah.
I'm still doing that. It's hard to exhibit now, with the pandemic. All the shows and even a lot of the galleries and places have kind of closed down. But I'm still making it, and
Good.
starting to add color now to the wood prints too. Before they were like black and white.
Yeah, right.
And I was
right.
into the contrast of the black and white. But now I started adding pastels to it as well and adding some color to them, and that's kind of fun. I
And
mean,
it's
art
still
is
a
some,
passion for you. I love it.
and Reedy Press was the publisher of this book, and they are such a pleasure to work with. And they asked me just a few weeks ago to write a second book, and that's going to come out next. Well, it's not going to come out. I'm going to give it to them in next September. They want a big coffee table book with lots of pictures and lots of vignettes and things about the Irish in St. Louis.
How
So
cool.
yeah, so next year maybe we can get together and talk about that.
Okay, of course we will.
Yeah, no, but
I want to.
that is a really interesting history, and I guess the Irish, the Switzers and the Murphys were Irish, so. And I already know a lot about Carrie Patch and
Is Carrie Patch still
no, it's
around?
pretty much flattened. It's where Pruitt-Igoe was near Carrie Patch.
Okay, all
But
right.
but if you just go a couple of blocks up from Washington to like Melanphy and Biddle and the borders have changed since the 1840s to 1900, but it was basically from about, I don't know, maybe 4th, 5th, 6th Street, all the way towards Jefferson. And it was, I mean, I've read all these old newspaper articles about Carrie Patch. It was just a horrible place, just really
Wow.
tough. But it had like 3 parishes in it. It had, and the churches, gave it. I mean, it was all Catholic and all
Right.
Irish, and so there was some stability to it. But it was just kind of a rough place. It was just a great
Wow.
place to get your butt kicked.
So
Yeah.
maybe good that Carrie Patch isn't around anymore.
I guess, but I mean, also like any other place with a lot of personality, it's people are very nostalgic about it now. And,
Yeah.
it's one of those places that people are very proud to be from, you know?
Well, probably because, like, look, I survived it.
Yeah, it's like, it's like
I
that. It's something
survived
that's
Cherry Patch.
something, but and then later, I mean, it's just been a neighborhood with a lot of poverty in it, ever since. It was I mean, the Irish, they moved out, and then Eastern Europeans moved in, and then African Americans and the Great Migration moved in, and there was discrimination, redlining, and so many bad things. That it's been a neighborhood that has been, just really had a tough time over the years, and now they're going to put that
Right.
big center there, the big geo,
Yes. Yes.
yeah,
I've
map
seen that being
making
built. Wow.
place.
Right.
But I was up there a few months ago, just driving around, just trying to see if there was anything standing really that I could use in the book, or if there was an address where maybe my family lived. And there aren't many. In fact, there are a couple of places where you can just look and see just nothing but flattened land for blocks.
Got
I
ya.
mean, everybody ought to just kind of get in the car every once in a while and drive through North St. Louis, and
Yeah, it's very interesting. No,
it
we've done
is
it. Yeah. I mean, my daughter and I we like to every once in a while just hop in the car and just explore what's
there's
around the city. There's
a
so
lot
much
of
people don't
history.
know.
There's the Polish neighborhood up around St. Stan,
Yep.
and then there were the Germans to the south of Market Street, and then the Irish. And my great grandfather said, you just didn't wander out of your own neighborhood. You just didn't. It
Got
just
ya.
wasn't safe.
Got ya.
Yeah.
So
So
kind of like we're insulated a little bit.
yeah, yeah. Well, back then people kind of hung out with their own people because it was just tough. It was tough. All these immigrants and people, the Irish were at least lucky because they spoke English. I mean, it was a lot
Right.
harder for people like Germans or Italians or Polish or Eastern European to become Americans because they had to learn English. I
Right.
mean,
Right.
the Irish, just once they lost their accent, they could kind of fit right in.
My
But
grandpa was from Poland. I mean, my
yeah,
grandpa is Polish. And so, and his mom, I mean, when I was growing up, so my great great grandma, she only spoke Polish. She never ever spoke any
really,
English. No.
my my mom's side of the family is German, and I remember my great grandmother when I was a kid. She forgot her English and started speaking German, but she was born in South St. Louis, and in her neighborhood they just spoke German.
Interesting.
My grandfather didn't speak English till he went to school. So I
I
mean,
love that you know all this history.
I just interested in it, just kind of pick it up. But it was fun to take all the stories that I heard as a kid. I mean, my family they were storytellers, and I heard these stories so many times that I had the feeling that I knew people who had died before I was born. They just
Right.
and they just kept these stories alive, and I'm glad that other people are interested in them. I think.
Well, and that's a tradition you've kept up. You didn't make candy, but you are a storyteller.
Yeah, yeah, I think. Well, yeah, that's kind of what we were doing at Channel 9, and telling stories. People like stories. I mean, stories
People,
stories are really
yes.
important, I think, to people. Everybody likes to listen to stories, and a
Well,
lot of
it's how
people.
you learn. I think it's one of the best ways to learn. And I mean, you told so many stories over the years. Is there another one that you're like, this is an awesome one that you guys should go back and listen to or watch the documentary or what have you?
It was uh, it was a big deal when they moved into the plant in 1911. They moved from where the arch was. They tore all those buildings down starting in 1940 so that they could build the arch. They didn't know they were going to build an arch. They knew they were going to build something there, some kind of national park. But they moved in 1911 into that factory, and uh, that was kind of a big deal because the factory was built in the 1870s. It was originally, they made stoves there. So it's like this huge brick 5-story building with these giant oak timbers in it.
Oh, wow.
And it was twice the size and it was interesting reading about how they moved in and how they turned this factory into sort of an iconic St. Louis before it had Switzer's on the. This is interesting. Before they made licorice in World War II, of course, they made all these other different kinds. And one of their big products was something called the buttermel. The buttermel. It was like a caramel. And it was a really big seller. And I found this picture from about 1920 where Switzer's is off in the background and there are all of these buildings in the foreground. Of course, there's no arch and you can see the river in the background. And when I looked real closely, it said Switzer's, home of buttermels on it. So they've been using that sign to advertise products long before
Good idea.
we today remember. And of course, when they were building the arch, there were so many pictures taken of that part of town. And in many of them, peeking out in the background is Switzer's Licorice, because it was right there. You know, it witnessed, the whole thing. But it's
So cool.
yeah, and it was interesting reading about the Depression. There was they call them Hoovervilles. It was just shacks and boxes and little communities that were built because there were so many homeless people during the Depression in the 1930s.
Right.
And the one in St. Louis was one of the biggest in the country. The name Hooverville, which, we hear about Hoovervilles after President Hoover, the term was coined here in St. Louis. I didn't know that. And there was this homeless village that extended along the riverfront for over a mile.
Wow.
Yeah. And I mean, they didn't have electricity or water or, anything. It's just amazing to think of how our city has in some ways changed and in some ways remained the same.
Yeah, no kidding.
Over this
It is interesting.
This long period of time. And it was interesting reading about the discrimination against Catholics. People were really afraid that this invasion of Catholics was going to completely change America. And it's something, you kind of hear about today.
Right.
Not with Catholics, but with other people who are different from us.
To accept things. Yeah, no, I'm with you.
Yeah.
Yep.
And there's just this fear, that these people, of course, now it is not unusual at all to be Irish Catholic,
Right. Yeah. Right.
In fact, one day a year, everybody's Irish. Everybody's Irish,
Well, Patrick, I thank you for spending this time with me today.
Thank you. This is fun. It's always fun to get together.
To catch up with you and learn what you were up to. And I love the book. Thank you for doing that for us.
Well, this was a lot of fun. And and thank you for teaching me how to use Zoom.
Look at us zooming here. We're cool.
A new skill. I'm a Zoomer now. Yeah. Hey, thank you. And a good way to get the book, if you're interested out there, is candymenthebook.com. And we have candy elves right there waiting to put one in an envelope, drop it in the mail just for you. All right, Mitch, see you later.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick Murphy. Have an awesome day.
You too.
Everyone out there, you've been listening to MichMash. We love you. Have an awesome one. Go get the book. Bye.
All right.